Take your seats. That's lovely. You know, this week I have to speak, and I also have the dentist. I don't know which is worse. I think at the moment both. Right. I just wanted to say, you know, this Saturday we've got an evening with Priscilla Reed. So it's going to be wonderful, and we want you girls to sign up so that we know where to hold the event. But judging by how many of you have come in late today, there is a problem because next week the clocks change and we lose an hour. So those of you who are late, why don't you start moving your clocks today? So that you will be on time next week. Does that sound like a good plan? I'm giving you a week's warning to change your clocks. Wonderful. It's really good to see everybody, and I'll try to speak slow so that Julia can understand me. You know, the verse I kind of was thinking about is in Ecclesiastes, chapter 11, verse 6. It says, "Keep on sowing your seed, for you never know which will grow. Perhaps it all will." And you know, our mandate and our focus this month has been on mission. And we've been thinking about mission and thinking about how we can talk to people, how we can share Jesus with this city. And you know, I love that mission looks in so many different ways. And we're supposed to speak Jesus wherever he finds us. You know, we're asked to sow that seed. And that seed, we don't know, we don't need to take responsibility of where it lands, when it'll take root, or what'll happen to it. We're just asked to sow the seed. And you know, that seed, you know, for Fran and Peter, I just want to honor you because you took that seed, that desire to help. Many of us had the same desire, but not many of us acted on it. But that desire to help, how amazing that Julia puts up a post on Facebook and Fran just happens to see it. You know, there's no happenings with God. It's all part of his plan. And the same with Julia, you know, everything's devastated. You know, she has not seen her husband for a year. He's a doctor and he's serving in the front line. So she hasn't been able to see him. He hasn't seen his little girl grow up. And so it's so challenging, but she has taken that step and she has moved on and she's here now. And we are the hands and feet of Jesus that's going to love, that's going to care, and that's going to love anyone else that God brings into this place. So every mission starts with an ordinary day. And you know, it's interesting, the Bible, we think, oh, the Bible is full of amazing stories. But if the Bible was to record all the ordinary stories, all the ordinary things, it would go on forever. We just get the highlights, kind of like Instagram. You just get a little glimpse. You know, if you're like my husband, you post twice in your life. But you know, there'll be like a picture here and then 10 years later, oh goodness, she's aged a lot because he hasn't posted anything, you know? Dig. But anyways, that wasn't in my notes. I don't know where that came from. Anyways. But what I was going to say is, you know, an Instagram reel, you're just putting in highlights. And that's what people's stories are like in the Bible. And I wanted to speak about Amy Carmichael just at the beginning. I wanted to use her as a little illustration at the beginning. Amy Carmichael, she was a girl from Northern Ireland. And when she was the oldest of 7 children. She was born in 1867, and she lived there. But she grew up in a godly home. But, you know, she allowed God to stir her heart for compassion. And so one day she was coming back from church, you know, and they were all well dressed with their hats and everything. And she noticed this older woman who was very disheveled and carrying a weight and was quite dirty and messed up. And something in her stirred, and she stopped at the old lady. She picked up the burden, and she got the woman to link arms with her, and she about turned and went back to where the lady was walking. And as she was walking back, she passed all the church people who looked down their noses that Amy had stopped to speak to this disheveled woman. But something birthed within her that day that God has got more for her than just living there. So she started working in Belfast. She started working amongst the factory girls, and she started teaching them. And she then she gathered enough money and bought a little tin hall. They say it's still in existence today. And she got this little hall, and she started bringing in all these factory girls. They called them the shawlies because they had shawls. They didn't have fancy hats to wear to church. And so she loved on them, and she started her mission just where she was. So it was no surprise when hardship came and her mum and her dad died and they had to move and they left to England. And again, they found themselves in Manchester, and again, she was working with the factory girls. It was no surprise that when one day she was listening to Hudson Taylor sharing about the mission in China, that something stirred within her. She thought, I want to give my life away for mission. And you know, mission doesn't start on the mission field. Mission started in Belfast. It started working with the poor and the ones that nobody liked and the ones that were the outcasts in society. And you know, she was rejected by the Chinese inland mission because of her health issues, but she didn't allow the rejection, and she didn't allow things to stop her because she knew there was a stirring in her spirit. And so she pushed more doors, and then in 1895, she traveled to the south of India, to Tamil Nadu, and she found herself down there to give her life away as a missionary. And you know, she never, ever left. She never came back on furlough. I find that amazing, that she was there throughout World War I, throughout World War II. She gave her life completely away. And it was an ordinary day. She was preaching and helping. It was an ordinary day when she was having her breakfast outside, and this little girl came running in, and she grabbed her, and she said, Amma, Amma, which means mother in their language. And she started listening to the story of this child. And you see, up until then, she was preaching the gospel. She was being the missionary. But on this day, this little girl turned her, because this little girl exposed what it was like to be a little temple prostitute. This little girl had been sold to the temple, the Hindu temple, to appease a debt or to fulfill a vow. And this little girl exposed what was going on. Up until then, the missionaries knew what was going on but turned a blind eye. And Amy had a choice. Was she going to do something about this situation, or was she going to ignore it? And she chose to pick up that mantle that day. And she took in that little girl. The little girl never left her side. She started going and rescuing more children. She opened up a home for the little girls. And then she opened a home for the little boys, because some of the temple prostitutes got pregnant and had little baby boys, and who would look after them? And she allowed an ordinary day to completely change what was happening. And so we have a choice, don't we? She had many, many ordinary days. She lived until she was 83. So there was many, many ordinary days in her life. But there was sometimes when the ordinary collides with the supernatural, collides with the extraordinary God, something takes place and something happens. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go through a few different things that I felt to share today. You know, sometimes an ordinary day can start anywhere. You know, the first thing I wanted to say is sometimes God shows up in your ordinary day. You know, and your ordinary day can go from barrenness to fruitfulness. I remember the day when suddenly I saw that blue line and I knew I was pregnant. Everything changed. And so this day, you know, we've got Zechariah, and Zechariah has been a godly man. You know, the Bible doesn't tell us anything about him. We don't know what he did. We know he was a priest, but we didn't know how he lived his life. We don't know if he had brothers and sisters. We don't know any of that. But we know on this ordinary day, God met him in the temple. He was just doing his ordinary work, the work that he had been called to, the work that he had been signed to. You know, and it was just another day in the office for him. He was a guy who obeyed the laws of Moses, kept everything, and it was his day to go into the temple. And he was in the temple, and suddenly God showed up in his ordinary day. You know, it says in Luke 1, verse 8 to 13, I put the word ordinary in there, okay. One ordinary day, Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his order was on duty that week. As was the custom of the priest, he was chosen to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and burn incense. While the incense was being burned, a great crowd stood outside praying. While Zechariah was in the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing right at the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife is going to have a baby. You know, sometimes we don't understand why God doesn't answer our prayers sooner. He had been praying all his life. I love the fact that God said, God has heard your prayer. I believe he was still praying. He was still believing God. He knew the story of Abraham and Sarah. He was still believing. And, you know, if God had answered his prayer 60 years earlier, John the Baptist would have been born way out of sync. You see, he had to be born at the right time. He had to be Jesus' age. He had to be the forerunner for Jesus. And that's why God took a long time to come through for his promises, because that's what he does, because God has a plan. Our wait has a reason. Our barrenness has a purpose. We don't understand sometimes. And, you know, I want to think about barrenness. This isn't just about mothers. This is about, you know, what about being single? You're waiting for that perfect person to turn up. You've been waiting for many years. You've been praying. You've like, God, have you forgotten about me? Are you too busy? Are you concerned about me? But, you know, in that season of waiting and wondering, and the temptation to compromise, and the temptation to look somewhere else, the temptation to help God out, I would just say to you, wait and just see what God will do, because there's purpose in everything. You know, some of the greatest people in my life, the greatest influencers in my life when I was a little girl, were some single missionaries that never got married. And they gave their lives away in the mission field. Amy Carmichael never got married. She was never a natural mother. But oh my goodness, she influenced thousands of little girls and boys for many, over her lifetime. You know, so we don't know, you know, and sometimes, you know, you're a couple and you're wondering, why has God not blessed me? Again, I would say some of the people who have influenced me most as a little girl were couples who never had their natural children, but God allowed them to minister to the missionary kids, minister to where they were called, and God has a purpose in everything. So what I would say is, in your ordinary day, serve in the valley that you find yourself in. Serve in that valley. Pray that a collision with the supernatural God will help. And even if it doesn't, his plans are better than our plans. His ways are higher than our ways. In Isaiah 55, he says that his ways are way above anything we could think. He has a better plan. And so don't get bitter. Just get better. Be like Zachariah. Zachariah was in a sweet place. He wasn't this angry man that had lots of attitude. He was a man that was there that was saying, okay, I'm just going to do what I'm doing. I'm going to go to work today. I'm going to pray as I usually do. And then God shows up. There was no guarantee God would show up and surprise him with a baby. But he knew that if he was faithful in the small things, God would be faithful in the big things. You know, when life seems ordinary and you think that God has forgotten your request, remember, no barren womb and no doctor diagnosis will stand against the Almighty, because when God opens a door, when he says your season is over, when he says the bitterness, the difficulties has passed, it is over. And just look forward to it. So the second thing I wanted to say, when you find yourself in a winter season, you know, we have all the different seasons, but when you find yourself in a winter season and you just wonder, how did this happen? How am I in a winter season of my life? How did this happen? When is winter going to end? You know, I'm a terrible one I hate the cold, and I've just been longing for spring. So far, spring has not really been very pleasant. I'm expecting spring. It's a bit like, you know, in lockdown, every time it was like, and we'll tell you next week what's going to happen. And I was so optimistic. Well, next week it's all going to be over. And I kept saying this, you know, months went by. But I feel like this winter has gone on so long. I'm like, surely spring is coming. But, you know, I just wanted to think about Joseph. You know, he's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. And, you know, Joseph, you know, you know the story of Joseph. I'm not going to go into all the detail because time doesn't allow. But, you know, He's been unfairly sold. He's a slave. He's in Egypt. He's in a faraway country. He is away from everything. He's having to learn a new language, and he's doing really well. Then, through awful circumstances, he is unfairly jailed, and he's in this prison. But in this prison, he still uses his gifts. He still is serving. He might be wearing prison clothes, but he's learning about the Lord. His character is being refined. You know, this is a gorgeous little Peter Rabbit here. And you know, Yulia is in her Egypt. Aberdeen is her Egypt. And she's in this place. She's having to learn a language. She's having to figure things out. The food is different that she eats and things. But you know, she's been making little things. And she's been crafting things and selling things. She's been getting on and being busy with what she does best. And so in your season, in your winter season, if this season is going on far longer than you thought, take courage, because the Lord has not forgotten about you. His plans are going to work out. And you know, when in this prison cell, you know, they say to Joseph is using his gift. He hasn't just put his gift aside. He's using his gift of explaining dreams and interpreting dreams. It only shows the Bible one dream. I believe Joseph interpreted many dreams. I believe many people came to him. But when this dream happens, he says, oh, now, when you get out, will you tell Pharaoh? And you know, it didn't happen. Pharaoh didn't know. Joseph had to languish 2 more years in jail. But in those 2 more years in jail, in the midst of the ordinary jail, God was developing his character. And you know, suddenly, when it's the right time, you see, if Joseph had been let out 2 years earlier, he would have never been there to help Pharaoh with his dream. But 2 years later, Pharaoh, it says in Genesis 42, Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once. He was quickly brought from the prison. He was shaved. He was changed his clothes. He went and stood before the Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream. No one here can tell me what it means, but I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. And this humble man who has learned all about the weight, he says, oh, it is beyond my power to do anything like this. But God can tell you what it means. And you know what really impressed me about Joseph? He's in this jail and everything happens, but he's keeping his spirit sweet. He's learning about God. He tried to jump the gun by saying, hey, remember me. He's trying to fix it. But again, for 2 years, I wonder what he thought. Lord, this is 2 years past my best. Why am I still here? But you know, when he came out, I always find this fascinating. He became the most important person in the land. Why did he not, when he was so important, why did he not say, could I get some time off? Could I go and see my family? He never went to see his family. He had the money. He had the privilege. He had everything. All of the chariots were at his disposal to go and fix it. But he waited. He waited for 9 more years, 7 years of famine, and 2 years into the years of famine. So that he waited for the 7 years of plenty, and 2 years into the famine, Joseph was still waiting when God thought, right, I'm going to collide with your day. And in that day, that's when he meets his family. You see, we can't try to push things and push things forward. God has a plan. We need to know, keep on keeping on in the ordinary days of life. Keep on working. Keep on showing up at your work. Keep on doing the small things. And God has not forgotten, and he will show up. And at the right moment, the door will open. And that's what happened to him. The door opened for him. So if you're in a winter season and you feel that it's like a jail sentence and nothing's happening, take hope and take courage. He sees, he knows, and he will deliver. He has not forgotten you. That life partner will come. That job application, it will happen. That visa that you've been waiting for, it'll come through. That friendship will be restored. That cancer treatment will come to an end. Your winter season will end. And we just have to stick in there and believe and pray. And in the ordinary, he is refining your character. The Joseph that came out of prison was a very different Joseph that left Egypt. God had worked and done incredible things. And so the last thing I'd wanted to mention was, we need to speak about a woman, don't we? We need to speak about Rebecca. And Rebecca in the Bible, sometimes you are living a settled life, and God wants to take your settledness and take you on a God adventure. And I believe that in her ordinary day, it was just a day she's taking her empty jugs, going to go and get water, as she did all the time. She was a shepherdess. And it was in that ordinary day that God collided with her. You see, Abraham, time doesn't allow it, but Abraham, he gives his servant a task. Can you imagine the task that he gave his servant? He gave his servant, right, I want you to go and find a wife for my son. And this promised child needs a wife, because how is this promised child going to have babies? And he gets a servant. He goes, I want you to travel 450 miles back to my home country, which I have never been to since I left. I want you to select a godly girl. I want you to find my relatives, select a godly girl. She needs to be generous and kind. She needs to bid her family farewell. And she needs to join you on the camel and come all the way back here and marry my son. And by the way, my son is 40 years old and still living at home with his dad. I mean, that is a pretty difficult task, right? I was going to say he was still a mommy's boy, but she had just died a couple years earlier. But he was this sweet boy that had lived at home, never done anything wrong, the promised child, the answer to the promise, and yet he's unmarried. And Abraham gives his servant an incredible task. I don't know who would have done it. I imagine that man prayed and fasted for those 40 days or however long it took to get there. But it was just an ordinary day that she was walking there. But I had just some personal thoughts about Rebecca. And don't quote me on this. This is just my imagination, okay? I wondered, did she used to dream about her uncle Abraham? And this uncle who had thrown caution to the wind and followed God? Did she hear about those stories? Did she hear about that uncle that went away? Did she know anything? Did she wonder what had happened? Did she look around at her family and realize that they had settled? This family that had compromised so much. This family that actually were worshiping God and also worshiping idols, because later on in the story it speaks about the idol worship. Did she have a sense of, is there more to life than this? God, have you finished? Is there anything else? I haven't met anyone here. You haven't stirred my heart for anybody here. I just wonder, because when she collides with this servant and he explains what happens, and she starts going down and filling those jugs of water and pouring the water out and coming back and pouring more water in, it was incredible what happened. She doesn't just give him water. She goes a second mile. She is enthusiastic. She went and she kept pouring until the last camel was filled. They reckon there was about 10 camels, and they drink gallons and gallons and gallons of water. It would have taken her a couple of hours or even more. But she continued, and he's watching her and praying, God, is this the one? Is this the one? How can it be? I've just happened to arrive. I just happened to be here. I happened to meet his relatives. Is this the one? And it was the one. You see, I believe that all along God was preparing her for an adventure that he was going to take her on. Because, when he explains who he is, she says, oh, let me take you back. You are in the right place. I am one of Abraham's servants. And she goes back and he explains everything to her dad and her brother and all this kind of stuff. And she doesn't seem to have much of a say in it, because they say, yes, take her. She's, it's worth it. It seems good to us. Let's go. But, I believe that that when this all happens, something is stirring within her. And I find it really interesting, that at the end, they've made that decision. Yep, she's going with you tomorrow, that's fine. But in the morning, and it says in Genesis 24, but first thing in the morning, they were up and he said, send me back to my master. Her brother and mother said, oh, let the girl stay a while, maybe another 10 days or so. And he said, oh, please don't make me wait. God has worked everything out. And then they say, well, let's call the girl. Let's see what she says. and she said, I'm ready to go. You see, God had been preparing her, I believe, for this adventure. And so she put faith over fear. She put obedience over her comfort, over the familiar, over the comfortable stuff. She thought, I'm going to trust in this God. I've heard about this God. I've heard that he had a baby. Because, information got back and forth. She had heard that things were happening. And she thought, wow, God is going to actually involve me in this. And I believe that's why I said to Simon, I really want to request that we sing that we sing Oceans. I believe that, we all know the story that Isaac was offered up as a sacrifice to test Abraham's obedience. But I believe Rebecca offered up her own life as a sacrifice, saying, I surrender. I surrender to you, Lord. I surrender to your plans and whatever you have. I think she would have loved this song, Oceans. You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown. And it wasn't unknown to her. There I find you in the mystery. And I will call upon your names and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. She doesn't know where she's going, but she was the one that said, I will go. I'm ready to go. When it said, with oceans rise, I just kind of jotted these things. She wasn't saying, sometimes when we think, we're going to God adventure, they're going to put down a red carpet, and everything's going to be amazing. But there was no red carpet, It sounded fun at the beginning. But, when oceans rise, that's when the storms, when everything gets stirred up in our lives, you make a choice. She made a choice. When trouble comes, I'm going to go. When I'm homesick, I'm going to go. When I'm lonely, when I'm barren. She didn't have a baby for 20 years. They went through a season of barrenness for 20 years, and she was wondering, God, I've followed you. I've walked out in those waters. I've walked out in the unknown. I left everything, and yet I'm walking in a barren place for 20 years. When I don't have my mum to guide me, when I don't have my family round about me, I will trust in the unknown. And, in conclusion, that verse we were talking about, Ecclesiastes 11, verse 6. Keep on sowing your seed. You never know what's going to grow. Perhaps it all will, but just keep on sowing it. Our ordinary days sometimes get interrupted with God interruptions. Amy Carmichael, I spoke about the ordinary day she had when she was interrupted with this little girl, and it was all exposed what happened in India with children, and she did something about it. But 35 years after that interruption, there was another interruption. She was in her early 60s, and she was in a place where they were building houses for the children up in the mountains, and she had gone up there to supervise. She was some woman, actually. And at nighttime, she fell into a huge hole that had been dug, and she didn't realize it. And she broke her leg so severely and her ankle so badly that she actually was lame for the rest. In fact, she was bedridden for the rest of her life. For the remaining 20 years of her life, she was confined to a bedroom. And she had lived 35 years, this crazy adventure. There was homes everywhere. There was hundreds and hundreds of boys and girls and children and women's Bible studies. Everything was going amazing. But on that ordinary day when she fell in a hole, things were changed dramatically, completely. And God sometimes gives us ordinary days that actually are devastating. And actually our life is never the same again. If something devastating happens to me in a few years, I'm going to have to pull out this sermon and speak to myself about it. Because, if suddenly you're thinking of Joni Erickson, she had a diving accident. Her life was never the same. The Lord didn't heal her. But in this season, the Lord used her. And something drastic happens, like it happened to Amy Carmichael. She was confined to the bed. She was confined, and she never was able, apart from shuffling a few feet, she never left her bedroom, they said. She was there all the time. But what she thought was, I can't do everything else, but I can start writing books. And she wrote up to 35 books and poetry and things like that. She wrote incredible things. Some amazing quotes that she had. One of them was, "A cup brimful of sweetness cannot spill one drop of bitter water, no matter how suddenly it's jarred." She started writing these things. If I am knocked over, if I have the sweetness of Jesus coursing through me, no matter what life comes my way, no matter what circumstances come my way, if things happen, if I have got the sweetness in me, then only sweetness will come out. She rescued many. She was a woman who was never a mum, but on her grave, there's only one word. It says Amma. She was a mother to thousands, the motherless. She was a mother to the motherless, and yet she never was a natural mom. You see, God had plans far greater. If she had married someone in Ireland and lived there for the rest of her days, we would never be talking about her. India would never have been changed the way it was. Some of our ordinary days catapult us into amazing victory. Think of David with his packed lunch. Woo, amazing. He defeated Goliath. Or Moses was discovered. Or the Samaritan woman, she bumps into Jesus. Some ordinary days are amazing. Some ordinary days send you into a hard time. Like Daniel was just praying and suddenly he finds himself in the lion's den. He was just doing what he was doing. But sometimes God has a plan in every season, whatever season you find yourself in. If you're in the winter season, if you're in an exciting season, if you're in the spring of your life, whatever it is, God has a plan. God had a plan for Amy. She wrote books and she did amazing things. And we have so many of her things. She wrote this one. There's another, it's funny, I was looking at her quotes, and can you believe it? Some of her quotes are on Pinterest. Imagine. Pinterest has got some of Amy Carmichael's quotes. This is one of them. But God is the God of the waves and the billows, and they are still his when they come over us. Again and again I have proved that the overwhelming thing does not need to overwhelm us. We may be cast down, but we are not destroyed. And so in your ordinary days, I would say remain sweet-spirited like Joseph. Keep on praying like Zechariah. And when the adventure shows up in your ordinary world, be prepared to go on that adventure. Sign up for a mission trip. Sign up for something. Do something that you didn't think you'd done, that you would do again. Do something and just see what there is, because there is purpose in every season. These ordinary days will end, but the impact of how we serve and live in the ordinary days or our winter season or risk the adventure with God will last for a lifetime. On my dad's grave, there's a little thing that's put there. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And looking out here, I don't know all of you in here, but today might be an ordinary day in your world. You might think, I'm actually drawing a line in the sand. I actually want to do things differently. I'm tired of going through this again. I'm tired of this habit. I'm tired of wandering around. I'm tired of just never taking that risk. So you may want to just think, I want to nail that. I want to pray with somebody about that. And I'm not going to have an appeal and bring you forward, but I want to say there's an amazing prayer team over here, and we have time to pray with you. Come and just say, sometimes it's good to talk with someone and say, I want to be accountable. I want to say to you that after today, I'm going to be a little bit different. I am going to take that risk, and I'm going to really do something. I'm going to believe that my ordinary day can collide with a supernatural God, and he can change your ordinary to extraordinary. He can change your barrenness to fruitfulness. He can change your winter into a spring season. But God can do it because he is God. Let's pray. Dear Father, I want to thank you so much. Thank you for everyone here. Lord, you know their hearts. You know, Lord Jesus, all the secret moments, the things that that people struggle with. But Father, I pray, just like throughout the Bible is story after story, how you showed up at work, how you showed up at the well, how you showed up in the desert, how you showed up in people's lives, and their lives were never the same. Father, I pray for everyone here, Lord, that they will take courage to make that step and to trust you in the ordinary and to trust you in the unknown. And I believe, God, that you will do amazing things with this group of people here today. In your precious name, Lord. Amen. Thank you.